All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you really quickly, in your own words, I always do this with a guest, want to introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Oscar, for having me on the
Mm-hmm.
show.
Mm-hmm.
And so my name is Leila Lehnen. I'm an associate professor of Portuguese and Brazilian in the Department of Portuguese and Brazilian Studies at Brown University. I'm also the current chair of the department.
Mm.
And I teach mainly Brazilian literature and cultural studies, and it coincides also with my research area. So that's what I do, primarily contemporary Brazilian literature.
Okay. Okay. And so it's this is all very interesting topic. I mean, we first met, I want to say I took a class with you years ago. I don't know if you remember when I was in your class in my undergrad in Brazilian cinema.
Yes, I do.
If you
I
do,
mean, it was a
okay.
big class, but I do remember you being there. Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
So,
and I think it was one of, and that was when I was still studying film.
yeah.
But I had started taking Portuguese because I had a bunch of Brazilian friends, and they're like, "It's so close to Spanish, I should take it," and all this. And the course presented itself, and it was probably that was the first time I had really been truly kind of critically challenged, I want to say. Um, just in the to the extent of just like not just like okay questioning my line of thinking, but also like okay this is a way, this is how to think academically. And I mean, you did not let down as far as like being a mentor later on in life and a guide. um, I saw an article that that was done about you recently. And I mean, I even posted, and there was a ton of comments on it from your former students saying, the same thing, which was one of our greatest mentors and guides in life, right? So you have a fan club. Let's just put it that way.
Well, that's very nice to hear.
Yeah, of
So,
course. So it was you really are one of these just people that I think you come across very not very frequently in life, where you're just you maybe I'm wrong. I don't know how you feel about yourself, but you just know what you're doing, and you're brilliant,
oh,
and anything you say is just kind of taken as just truth coming out of your mouth, because there's something about you that you're just like, okay, this person has worked hard to get to where they are, right? Um, but I think more than anything, when I have people on this show, I want to kind of highlight a little bit about how they got to where they are, right? I see you as this superstar in my eyes.
oh,
And
thank
I'm not just
you.
here to flatter you the whole time. I mean, I could do that.
But you
But
don't need to. I mean,
no, 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 no. But I really do. I really do. And I always talk very highly of you. I always talk about you and Jeremy as being my academic parents, right? Because you really kind of created me in the way I think critically in the world today. And um, that's because of you two, right? So what brought you to where you are today? I mean, did you grow up wanting to look at literature critically and look at social, I mean, because you look at social movements as well through literature, correct?
I do. I look at social issues in literature. I
Okay.
mean, I don't. That's kind of what I'm interested in
Hmm.
literary production.
Okay. Okay. So what specifically? I mean, is there democracy, citizenship, I think is something that we've discussed in the past, correct? Is that what you're still doing now?
No, well, yes and no. So, first of all, thank you, Oscar. You don't know how much this means. All these
Sure.
words mean to me
Sure. Sure.
because, yeah, it really touches me very deeply to know that
Absolutely.
I had that kind of impact on
Hmm.
somebody's life and somebody that I respect. Um, and in terms of the topics I deal with in my research and my teaching is so yes, democracy and citizenship, which are topics that I have continually worked on,
Hmm. Hmm.
directly or indirectly, human rights associated with that, right? I'm looking more and more into the questions of social justice and environment. So,
Okay.
environmental humanities,
Hmm. Hmm.
what role the environmental humanities, especially, as they manifest themselves in literary production, what role they can play in kind of, how would I say this, change our attitudes towards the environment and make us more conscientious stewards of our environment. And I do think that, cultural production in general has a big role to play. If you think about, movies and books and articles, etc.
Yeah, I mean, they do play a big role. When I first started, going back to my kind of initial kind of academic beginnings, I guess, is looking at film. I looked at it more as just kind of cultural productions being a result of what's going on in society and being a reflection, right? But it wasn't until I kind of started working with you that I understood it, and I started to understand how they could influence certain outcomes, right? Specifically around abolition movements of slavery, right? And writing it in a certain way that would influence or essentially kind of infiltrate and create ideas within people's minds that would make these things become more realistic. Is there, what do you see coming out of Brazil right now that's really kind of helping that? I mean, there's just so much going on down there.
Yeah, not all of it very good, right?
Right. But like, is there, what sort of cultural productions are coming out of Brazil that you see maybe potentially having an influence over this?
Well, I mean, so I think that I think first of all, I would like to kind of broach the word influence, right? It's not a literary production necessarily. I'm not going to, I don't know, go to a protest because I read a novel necessarily. It can be one of the outcomes, but I think that the big contribution of culture, including literature, to social justice is that it changes the way we think, right? So the abolitionist text, that was kind of the purpose, is changing perceptions and expanding our modes of thinking. So for example, with the environment, right, changing how we see the environment, instead of seeing it as a resource or seeing animals as these beings that are subordinated to us, to seeing them as our equals, for example. Texts can do that, right? Because of the way they present and narration and et cetera, And then to respond to your question more directly, it depends on what theme, So in terms of the environment, you have, I particularly like the work of Eliane Brum, who is this journalist and writer and just an activist who writes a lot of opinion pieces. She has some stuff published in The Guardian, in El País, Brazil. She also has just a book that came out in translation recently, The Collector of Leftover Souls. And it's basically a collection of her essays. They're in English. It's non-fictional, but the way she writes these journalistic pieces, it's very much infused with this literary sensibility, right? So it's the language is very poetic. She uses metaphor. She uses, a lot of resources from literary language to exactly that, to create a certain, to grab you, right? In a way that a purely journalistic piece is, that you would read, for example, in the New York Times, wouldn't grab you the same way that you read a piece in the New Yorker or the Atlantic, right? It's just a different way. It's the new journal. I think it's new journalism. That's.
Okay. So this is kind of a new field or a new area.
No, it's just the name of the type of the genre, the journalism.
Okay. So not necessarily actually new. It's just the name. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then you have some novels. There's one novel that I read recently that I can recommend. It's called Maria Altamira, and it's about the construction of the Belo Monte Dam in Pará, right, in the Xingu River. I also really enjoyed reading text by this indigenous writer called Davi Kopenauer. And the text is actually was published actually first in English and then was translated into Portuguese, strangely enough. It's called The Falling Sky. And it presents this whole cosmovision of the of indigenous peoples, right?
Yes. Right.
And it really it shows you a different way of engaging the world around you, especially the natural world.
Okay.
It's kind of, it really kind of messes with your mind in the way, because, and again, it's
Mm-hmm.
done through language. It's with language
Right.
that kind of gets you to that point of saying, whoa, okay, what happened here, right?
Right. It kind of the way it just wakes you up, right? It
Yeah.
forces you to be aware the whole time because so much is happening. And it's the style of writing that
Yeah.
you have to pay attention to. But it's done intentionally, right? It's not
Yeah,
some
I would say
yeah.
so. I mean, a
Yeah.
good writer will do it intentionally, I think.
I'm sure there's plenty of bad writers that don't, right? And I mean, I think I remember, I mean, when reading things, when looking at these culture productions, how much does the intention of the producer, the director, the writer actually kind of matter? Is the meaning making of those reading it more important?
Yeah.
In short, yes. Can you tell me why?
Well, I mean, it's basically, I think that, I don't, and this from taking my classes, I
Sure, sure.
never discuss the intention of the writer. I just don't think that's the way to deal with text, right? I mean,
Right.
for example, we read texts that were written in our classes. We read texts that were written, in the 17th century, in the
Mm-hmm.
19th century.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what ultimately the intention of the writers
Sure,
was,
sure.
but I think that the text speaks for itself in a way.
Or it should,
Um,
right? It should, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so it's what you bring to this reading, how you can engage, your sensibility that makes this text come alive every single time it's read, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
that's the important part. I mean, of course you can, interview a writer and ask him or her, hey, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
But I think that takes away a little bit of the pleasure of reading the text.
Yeah, I mean, so many people are obsessed with these days with just like, well, this is what they meant to do.
Yeah.
And part of me is just like, okay, I mean, I think being conditioned for so many years to just be like, who cares what they want? This is how I'm interpreting it. Do you think that leaves too much room for people to potentially interpret things, quote unquote, the wrong way? And is there a wrong way to interpret these things? I mean, because it could essentially lead to people interpreting things in a way that makes for for us want to destroy the environment in a weird way, right? I mean, people are nuts.
Yeah.
Let's keep it real. I mean, people may look at it and be like, well, this is how I interpret it, and this is how I'm going to move
Yeah.
forward with it. Is there a wrong way to do it?
Yeah, there's definitely a wrong way to read text. I mean,
Yeah. I don't know.
um,
Yeah.
no, I mean, and that's the big fight when you're teaching literature also,
Sure.
to say, okay, no, you have a certain range here that,
Mm-hmm.
you can read certain things in the text, but there are also things that you cannot read into a text, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there is a science. I mean, people think that, analyzing literary text is all like, oh, what I think, what I
Yes.
feel, and
Yes.
as you know from my classes, it's not about how you feel. It's you have to
Mm-mm.
prove
Yes.
why
Yes.
arrived at a certain conclusion. The
Mm-hmm.
text will give you that material, and that's why we
Mm-hmm.
dedicate.
Mm-hmm.
There's scholarship on this, there are classes on this, there are
Yeah. Yeah.
graduate programs on this. It is, I mean, it is in a way a certain science, right? I mean, there
No,
are
yeah. Yeah. I agree.
techniques
Yeah.
on how to read a text.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, I absolutely agree. And, I'm playing devil's advocate here because in having moved over to the social sciences, it was such a battle for me to always be like, well, the qualitative, I mean, you got to contextualize things, qualitative versus quantitative, and looking at things a certain way. And me always kind of doing a cross method analysis, right? And quantitative, qualitative, and making sure that I think there's an importance to both, right? Because if
yeah,
you reduce something down to a number, you lose the importance in the context, and then that's not how the world works, right? And then you get data wrong and all of this stuff. But also the qualitative, I think, is, yeah, people really do see it as just like feelings. And it's just like, well, it really, it kind of means whatever you want it to mean. And I think it's kind of for people who don't, aren't necessarily okay with not having control, as I put it, have an issue with qualitative work, right? And with looking at things a certain way. But there is kind of a method to quote unquote the madness that appears to be. And you can't just write anything. So I appreciate you kind of saying that out loud, because I feel like sometimes I'm just arguing against a brick wall, telling people, I'm like, no, there is a way to do this, right? There's a right way to do this. So, I mean, yeah.
Well, and if you don't mind me saying this, I mean, I'm going to sound blasphemous here, but sometimes the quantitative part in the social sciences is very arbitrary as well, because,
Yes.
it's like, okay, you decide this is how I'm going to put this data set together. This is how I'm going to interpret it. This is how the formula is, this is what the formula is going to be. I mean, that's informed by your subjective decision. And a lot of times it's informed also by the outcomes you want to achieve. So
yes, because you're only collecting
not that your data will lead you to the outcome. It's the outcome that leads to the data, which is, in my opinion, at least, a really unscientific way of doing things.
Right. Because you're starting with a question: is this true or not? Right, and that's you want it to be a certain way because you want to get published, right? So that's the main thing. Versus reading the text and letting it guide you, which is, I think, a big part of what we did, right? It's just letting the text guide you and being like, okay, where's the gap in this? Where's the question? Where are the questions here? Instead of just being like leading with the question. And the data set, I mean, a lot of the time the data set will be like, oh, well, I'm going to take this, and this, but also not control for this, and this, which is also a relevant question. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And now I suddenly feel not insane. Thank you.
Well, good.
This is all just an affirmation for me. We can stop now. No, but I mean, this is all great, right? And I think this is a very important topic as far as like the way we look at the world, the way we study it, how we contextualize things, and asking those academic questions. I'm like, okay, where did that data come from? Let's look at this, how to read things, right? How to interpret things. These are all skills that a lot of people really don't have, just critical thinking skills.
Yeah, well, and if I may interject here, it's and I think that you're seeing how important these critical, reading, listening, and viewing skills are, because I think that a lot of the issues we have now, socially, politically, environmentally, it's because people are not examining things in a critical or even analytical way, right? It's just like, and the other thing with literature is this whole idea of being able to engage in different modes of thinking, right? It's something that is also missing nowadays. I mean, we're so in our little bubbles, on different sides of the political spectrum.
Absolutely.
And I think that literature, is a way of bridging these gaps, and I go back, I mentioned abolitionist literature, but that's exactly what abolitionist literature did. It convinced slaveholding or people in slaveholding societies that slavery was a bad thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or in dictatorships, when you have books that are published that denounce human rights abuses in authoritarian regimes, when people read that, there's also, there's a certain, it can have a certain effect, right? That translates into very concrete actions.
Right. There's something about the process of reading versus watching something. I always say is that, maybe not so much all films, but a lot of media that is created has been pre-synthesized for you. So it's the oversimplification of ideas and information to be quick and fast, because I'm on the move all the time, quote unquote. People are on the move all the time. So that's the danger of, the world we live in. Whereas like reading a book, it allows you the time to actually sit there and think about it one line at a time. And as you're thinking about it, there's something important to the process of reading a novel, reading a book, reading an article that allows you to kind of hit pause and actually kind of read things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And say, did I read that correctly? What does that mean? And it forces you to ask questions, right? There's something very beautiful, in my opinion, about literature. And there's something important about literature or about just reading and becoming a reader in the development of a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important thing to do. And we, as a society, global society, we've kind of moved away from that, unfortunately, right? Unless you're an academic or, something else, that's not something that people do these days, right? I work in the realm of kind of press releases these days and media announcements, and you want to keep it short and sweet because people's
Mm-hmm.
attention spans are really short.
Yeah.
The and you're kind of playing into this idea that like people just don't care. What do you think it is that is driving us? I mean, this, you may have an opinion on this or not, but like, what is driving us away from the kind of like this idea that reading is good, right? And I don't know if we are, or this oversimplification of dialogue.
Well, I think that this debate has been going on for a long time. I don't think
Sure.
it's anything,
No.
I mean, you
No.
had the advent of radio, you had the advent of, television,
Mm-hmm.
the internet, et cetera, that, and I don't know if people read less now, than they used to. I don't have the data, right?
Yes.
To kind of compare it with.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is the question of attention span of, we are used to bite-sized information. And
Yes.
I mean, I noticed that even in myself, I don't do Facebook a whole lot, but when I
Mm-hmm.
do it, sometimes I don't have the patience to read the very long posts, or, I'll
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
skim through it, etc.
Right.
And I think that, in a way, reading, longer pieces, be it a novel, a short story, even a poem, because it's the type of engagement that
Mm-hmm.
you have. There's a certain, almost like a mental kind of it's a meditative state, right?
Yeah.
That you get into.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between, let's say, reading an article, right? Even if it's a longer article, and reading a piece of fiction or a piece of poetry, like a poem, is that you're doing a certain work with your brain that you're
Mm-hmm.
not doing when you're reading an article. You have to, of course, you're presented with characters, etc., but you still have to think about what these characters look like, what the setting looks
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
if it's a poem, you have to think, okay, why is it that the author is using this metaphor or this, this word instead of that word, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain, it's work. It's not, I'm just going to read it to inform myself. There is a certain processing going on that's
Yeah.
different from the processing that you do when you read, news, even if it's, as I
Sure.
said, even if it's something a little bit more substantial,
You're
right?
you're expanding your mind because you're not only expanding your vocabulary, but you're forcing yourself to kind of grow and understand ideas and new concepts, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
looking at the world through a different lens almost.
yeah, exactly.
Right. And
And
that's an important thing to do, because we're so stuck in a place where that's my way or the highway, majoritarianism, where that's not how the world works, right? There's multiple perspectives and views on any which topic, right? So, and I think language is one of those things, whether it's English, Spanish, Portuguese, it allows you to look at a certain thing from a certain perspective, from various perspectives, because there's different ways of discussing it, different vocabulary, and every language has its history, right? So there's that
well,
weight. There's a
and
weight to the
languages
language.
also have different ways of making you engage with the world, right? I mean, think
Sure.
about Spanish, right, and Portuguese,
Mm-hmm.
same thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
like the whole idea of the subjunctive, right?
Yeah.
No, I mean, for an
Right.
English speaker, it's just it again, it's like
Yeah.
you change the way you look at things. Like, oh, there's a tense for that, or the conditional, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's really a different. English doesn't have that, not in like that formally, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
just makes you think differently. And that's one of the big advantages also of learning languages, you
Right,
know.
right. Yeah, it forces you to also kind of learn a little bit of the history of that culture, because how did this kind of come about, right?
Mhm.
It didn't just happen for nothing, right? Just like with any good writing, it hopefully happens intentionally, but the words, the language, it exists now, not just on a whim, but out of necessity, right?
Mhm.
And you yourself, I mean, I think, like, I'm going full circle here, became this person out of just your life experience, right? And you may know where I'm going with this. Where did this kind of, would you say it's a love or passion, or a love or passion for, I mean, literature come from? Did you grow up reading?
Yeah, I did grow up reading. Yeah, yes, it is a passion. Yes, I did grow up reading. My parents don't are not literary people per se,
Oh,
right?
no. Okay.
No. But yeah, I don't know. I remember the first book. I remember my very first book. It was this beautiful
Mm-hmm.
book of Indian folk tales, in hardcover, with
Mm-hmm.
glossy pages, illustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother gave it to me, and I didn't know how to read, and she gave it to me, and she said, if you want to know what the stories are about, you will have to learn how to read."
Nice.
So
Nice.
I did, so
Okay.
to read
Yeah.
that book,
Yeah.
and I have the memory of sitting, this wasn't in my grandparents' house, sitting, in their front living room
Mm-hmm.
and just
Mm-hmm.
reading this book, and
Mm-hmm.
there was also, come to think about it, certain central experience, because it's just, I can remember the weight of the book,
The
right?
weight. Yeah.
And kind of
Yeah.
the feel of the pages, because they were thick pages,
That's
etc.
how I know you really, it is a passion of yours, because you talk about a book like you talk about an ex-lover, right? You're just like the way.
I think I talk better about the book than
And the
about
ex-lovers.
my
Okay, there
exes.
you go. There you go. It's just like the weight, and just like I carried it around, and it taught me so much, and I became who I am because of it. And no, but I have those books as well. Like there's people, the e-readers, and there's convenience to them, right? But
Oh yeah, yeah. I
there's a
love e-readers now.
yeah, yeah, no, but like if I can get my hands on the book, and I like a good hardback, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And it's just like I can knock on the cover, and I carried it around with me, and the smell of paper. One of my favorite places on earth is Powell's bookstore in Portland, Oregon.
yeah,
And I mean, I can never not leave there. I can never leave there without, I mean, just half a suitcase full of books. Just because it's just there's something about carrying it around. I build a relationship with this book,
yeah.
right? And that's how it sounds like. You just from the very beginning, you felt it. Like, this is it. This literature, right?
Yeah, and I think it always has been also it's the possibility of losing yourself. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
literally, there's my ideal weekend is I get up, I'll have my
Mm-hmm.
coffee, and I spend the entire day on my couch with the book,
Mm-hmm.
drinking my tea with my cat. So,
Nice, nice. How many pets do you have now?
We have four right now. So we have two large dogs, two mastiffs, one English and
Large.
one yes.
Large is an understatement, but yes.
And then two cats. Yeah.
Two cats, no chickens in Rhode Island.
No, we didn't have the best of experiences with our chicken in
Mm.
New Mexico. She was a great chicken, but she destroyed our garden. So
Oh, no way. Okay, well,
yeah,
the garden. Plants are better than living creatures sometimes, in my opinion. I
that's debatable, but that's
I
okay.
don't
But we
know.
have
Living
plenty
creatures
of
are great. Living creatures are
yeah.
great. Don't get me wrong, but I love my plants. Like, I love my plants.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and we have here in Rhode Island, you have rabbits and you have squirrels. So
okay.
you look out of the window and there's all this wildlife.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We're just, yeah, it's very different, right? New Mexico is. Let's just
Well,
put
in
it
New
that
Mexico,
way.
you had the road runners, right?
Which are neat. They're like tiny little raptors, and it's always
They're
interesting seeing this.
mean.
They are mean.
So
They're no, they're
mean.
aggressive animals. I don't see
Yeah.
why they're protected. I mean, like really, they can fend for themselves,
Yeah.
honestly. But yeah, so I mean, I think going back a little bit more, even because you have such an interesting story from what I know of it, right? I think it's kind of culminated in you being again this person that I admire so much. Um, you have such a mixed background for one, but also such an interesting academic background, right? Do you mind diving into like your origins?
No, no, not at all.
Okay.
So my mother is Indian from Goa,
Hmm.
and my father is Brazilian of German ancestry, and I was born in France.
Right.
I grew up in Switzerland, in Brazil, in India, and in Germany. And then
A
I did my
mix. Yeah.
undergraduate. Yeah, I did my undergraduate in Germany in German studies.
Hmm.
And then I came to the States. It was kind of a chance thing. It was supposed to be for a year, and then I ended up staying, and I did a master's in comparative literature at the University of Washington, Seattle, and it was a just
Mm.
very strange combination. It was German and Portuguese, so German literature and Brazilian literature. And
Huh.
then I switched to Spanish and Spanish and Portuguese, and that's what I did my PhD in at Vanderbilt.
Okay. Okay.
So
That's quite. I mean, that's such a. It's this is kind of diverse, right? You want to diversify your career and your life. I mean, that's as diverse as it gets, right?
well, it still
And
stayed all within like the humanities. I didn't do the social sciences
no,
or
no,
definitely
no,
not the
no.
STEMs.
Sure, sure. No, I mean, yeah, I don't know how you would do in general chemistry 101, right?
I would
But
be terrible at
oh
it.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I'm sure but still, I mean, you picked an area in the humanities and you really did a lot of different things, specifically literature, right? I didn't know that you did your undergraduate in German. Was it German literature? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it was German. I mean, it was German literature. I kind of dabbled around, but primarily it was German literature. So.
Okay, and that's such an interesting thing. I mean, it's you lived in several different countries. You were born in France. I mean, it's and you happen. I know so many people, Brazilians or people from all over the place that come to the U.S. and then they end up staying.
Mhm.
Like, what was it for you that did it? I mean, it must have been our wonderful political system or our healthcare, right?
It wasn't as bad back then.
Oh, okay, okay,
I think it was the Clinton years still.
sure,
Uh,
sure.
um, no, it was actually, this will sound really, really bizarre. It was actually the structure of the academic system in the United
Huh,
States.
okay.
So I'm someone who I think works better if she has structure. And the
Hmm.
German academic system at that point was very, very open. You could, take classes forever, a lot of classes you didn't have to turn your papers in. I mean, you just would take in completes, and it was like this whole kind of,
Yeah, yeah.
very free, which was great on the one hand because it gave you a lot of space to explore,
Hmm.
which I
Hmm.
did. But on the other hand, it meant, you had the lifers basically. And I don't know if I would have been a lifelong student.
Sure, sure.
And the United States, it was very different. You had,
Like
the
a guided
UW.
path, right?
Well, yeah, and you had your deadline, so you had to finish.
Hmm.
You finished your term, and so at the UW it was trimester, so the quarter system. So you finished your quarter, you turned in your paper, you had your break, you started a new quarter, and it went like that,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it really worked for me. I felt, how would I say this? I felt that this is kind of the system I was supposed to be in.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah,
I mean,
and
that
then
makes
and
sense.
then
Yeah,
I think I also liked so in Germany you had seminars, but you also had these huge lectures,
yeah.
and but you didn't really have much of a chance of kind of, it wasn't the work, the you learned a lot, but it was a more kind of the lecture format. I liked the engagement that
Hmm.
the seminar
Hmm.
style type of classes provided here in the
Yeah,
United States.
yeah. I mean, it is a difference. I experienced it briefly. The European kind of system, more open ended, and everything's based off the final grade essentially, right? And there's very little kind of structure to it, and it is different. It allows more for just like I can just cram at the end of the semester and get through, versus a guided path the whole time. So it was different, and I agree with that. I mean, was there? You're in a very specific area, and I think academia kind of does kind of force you into being like the expert of this corner, the corner of this corner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything specific? Was there a class? Was there a book? Was there a movement? What was it, your life experiences that kind of led you to look at what you look at now in your research?
I think I would say there were three people who totally shaped who I am, you know, in different ways. So there were three professors, two at the University of Washington, one at Vanderbilt, who then was one of my dissertation advisors, who really, you know, that's if I'm here, sitting here, talking to you here now about all these things, it's because of them.
Sure.
So
yeah. So she's your Leila, or they don't.
And I hope they know that. I think they do. So
yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, there's those people you don't forget, right? They just mold you, and they made an impact on you. And they're, I mean, anytime that I think I'm just, they're like, oh, you just look at it so critically, and so like you're so smart. I'm like, well, I mean, I can tell you who to write the thank you note to. Right.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you, Oscar.
Yeah, and I will say one of the best like compliments I get is like, you're so just eager to get feedback and critical feedback. And I was just like, oh, you could thank my graduate advisor for that, you know, just the conditioning of just being like, all right, if you want feedback, you're going to have to come to me. Right. And
yeah, but I mean, people don't usually appreciate the feedback. It's like, oh.
Yeah, I know. And that's, a lot of people don't appreciate it. Right. And I think that's a different, I mean, there's not to say that, you know, they're not deserving of certain things or whatever, but there is the type of person that can take certain things and that wants to self-improve and that wants to be better. And I definitely saw that in you, right? I think you were very much the type of person that that would give us all the feedback and the resources that we need, but you were also getting us ready, right, for the world in a lot of ways. And I would always say it's like a tough love. Tough love. I remember very vividly, and it's a good thing because it's gotten me very far. But you said always start with a hello, Leila, and then sign off with a goodbye, right? And yeah. And I think you probably remember this conversation, but it was one of those things that it stayed with me, but it's gotten me super far, Leila. And it's the smallest thing, right? But a lot of people don't take these things very well, and they can't handle it. And that's okay. Maybe it's not for them, but I do think it's an important thing to learn. And it's an important thing in your development, whether it's professional development, academic, or whatever. It's those little things that kind of really kind of separate people, one group from the other, in my opinion, right? And unfortunately, not everyone deserves the opportunity to, you know, to go to school and to maybe get a master's or a PhD or whatever, but I don't think everyone's cut out for it.
No, not everybody is.
Right. There's just
and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
no, exactly. And that's what I mean. It's like, there's nothing wrong with that, but there is a certain level of a grit that you have to be able to kind of like work through things and understand certain concepts and really kind of look at things certain ways and not take it personally, but understand that like, that you're being molded in a certain way so you can think critically, because you're entering a world where you're going to be producing, you know, research that is going to be taken very seriously. So you need to be responsible enough to be able to understand what you're doing with it. Right. And not everyone can do that. And I think you're one of the few people that really kind of understood that. And I don't know, maybe and you were kind of in a really direct way pushing us to be better. Right. And I think that's great. Right. And I think I don't think that's short of, I always thought it was maybe your studies in Germany, because I knew you had studied in Germany, but you're telling me that was more loose, right? And more open. Maybe it was the University of Washington that really kind of molded you into this person.
I think it was a combination. I mean, first of all, thank you for saying that and for recognizing that,
Yeah. Yeah.
the tough love was
Hmm.
not meanness,
No, no.
which, some people think it is, or it was,
Sure.
but really, and really a desire to help
Hmm.
the students. Um, I think it was, going back to the experience, I think it was a combination of things. I mean, Germany, you're not afraid, you learn not to be afraid to question things and to confront
Hmm.
people and
Hmm.
disagree. And I think that that's something that I found is a little bit lacking in the North American system.
Yes, absolutely. You
You
want to be
don't
liked.
disagree with
Yeah.
you don't disagree with your peers. Even as a professor, you have to be very cautious and very careful in how you utter
Hmm.
criticism, even
Hmm.
if it's constructive criticism, which criticism should always be constructive. But, I have to say the people I worked with, they were not they didn't handle me with kids' gloves, right?
Sure.
And I am profoundly, profoundly grateful for that. I mean, they were very
Hmm.
direct with me. They
Hmm.
told me, I was told I couldn't write and that I needed to work on my writing, and I
Hmm.
did,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and I, to this day, I am very grateful to the person who said that to me,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I
Yeah.
always I tell all my students the story about, my advisor who
Yeah.
I think I told you the story about the who cares, right? The big question of,
Yeah.
I came to her with my proposal, the idea for my dissertation, and she's like, well, just answer one question. Who cares? And I, actually, that's a
Hmm.
great question. I should
Yeah.
be writing about something that is meaningful,
Hmm.
and what I had presented was not meaningful,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I had to revisit it. And I think that, and I think that question, actually, the who cares question, is what led me then to become so interested in the dialogue between literature and social justice, right? Because I
Okay.
do so,
Right, because that's so. I'm assuming the answer is like the question is who cares. It's not like something that you're passionate about, but something that is relevant and
Mhm.
that people are passionate about in general, society. That's relevant to our lives.
Yeah, and I mean,
Okay,
yes, I have to be passionate about it. I'm in a
of course.
field that if I'm not passionate about something, I know I always tell
Yeah.
this to all my students: if you are
Hmm.
not passionate about this, don't do it. It's not worth it. You don't make money.
Yeah. Yeah.
You oftentimes are in place. You live in places that you don't like because that's where the job is, right? I mean, there's so
Hmm.
many buts. I mean, I'm not saying I have a wonderful life. I love this
Yeah.
profession. I'm at a
Absolutely.
wonderful institution in a great department, et cetera,
Yeah.
right? So I'm very, very lucky.
Yes.
But it is a tough field,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so, no, I have to be passionate about it, but it's not just about me. I love cats, and I probably could write about cats, but who cares? So,
I don't know. I mean, if you ever want to venture out on a side project, you know,
so
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I get it, and I think that's awesome, Leila. I mean, I think you do a lot of really good work, right? And something that also sticks out to me, and that I always think how right you were, because there's so many moments just have trickled out throughout my time with you, and if just of education. We were talking about education and activism, and you said, education or being an educator is its own form of activism.
Mhm.
And you really are changing lives out there, right? You're doing your own research, and you're 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 doing the work for people so they can read it, and they can, maybe you're putting ideas in people's minds. But also, one of my other kind of professors, late professors, her name was Kendra Koivu, and she would always talk about how the most important thing that we do, and you two stand out mostly because of this, is we educate, we
Mhm.
teach, right, our students, um, how to think critically, and how to think about certain things, and how to digest things, and how to dissect things, and how to do all this stuff. And it's such an important part of your job, right? And you're doing it at this wonderful university now. And I mean, is it do you feel like there's a difference between what you used to do at the University of New Mexico and now? Or, I mean, it's all activism in my opinion, right? And it's all worthwhile. But what would you say are the biggest kind of disparities between those two? And what, I mean, that's a big question.
Well, I think it's kind of an obvious question, right? I mean, they're very,
Mm,
very different institutions.
sure, sure.
Um, so, I mean,
I mean, are we reading the same books though, right? Are we reading the books?
yeah,
Does it come
yeah.
down to like literal like money, resources? Is that it?
I think it comes down, well, let me put it this way, okay?
Sure.
And this is something that I had, I always taught at the University of New Mexico that just because people came from, a lot of times non-academic backgrounds, there were a lot
Mm-hmm.
of non-traditional students, first
Mm-hmm.
generation students,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
etc. Just because you had that background and your parents weren't doctors and lawyers, not all of your parents, or not
Sure.
most of your parents were
Sure.
doctors and lawyers, etc., didn't mean that you did not have the capacity to do really good work and that you shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be challenged,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I do not think that people need to be patronized.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you need to be challenged. That's how you're going to learn, right? And
Yeah.
it's not always pleasant to be challenged. I don't like to be challenged a lot of times, but
Sure. Sure.
that's um,
Yeah.
and I think that sometimes I felt that you know the students wanted to be challenged,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the message would be like, oh no, you're too harsh. And because,
Yeah.
but it's so patronizing, right?
Right.
It's so
Right.
patronizing. I think that you have really, really, really smart and capable people at the university, of students at the, and of course, faculty as well, but I'm talking about
Yeah,
the
sure
students
them.
here.
Sure them.
But it's just, yeah, let's challenge these people, look at you. I challenged you, I
I mean,
challenge
I
other
couldn't agree
people.
more. I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree
Yeah.
more in the sense that like it's and I definitely did I did get called out a lot because I felt like no, yeah, everyone deserves the opportunity, but we need to challenge people to be able to do it because they can, right?
Yeah.
Not in an attempt to weed people out,
No,
right?
no, it's
And
just,
that's how people see it.
I
Yeah.
believe that you can rise to the opportunity. I'm going to
Yes.
ask you the questions,
Yes.
I'm going to correct you, but it's because I think you can, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's true because they can, right? And they just need some guidance and that challenge.
Yeah,
And it's unfortunate. And I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you in that sense, right? There is kind of like we need to make it as easy as possible to people to get through this, but then you're devaluing it. And
exactly.
then it's not that's not fair to them in the long run because then they apply to a different school and it's not the same, right? And they just
Or they just, they don't even, because, I think that a lot of times that it's the challenge that makes the learning more interesting. And if you're not challenging, then it becomes rote, right? You just kind
yeah.
of go through the motions and you go to
Hmm.
class and you don't pay attention. And what are you learning really?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment, but
So,
no, I'm just teasing. But yeah, anyway, I mean, I think this flew by, Leila. I mean,
yeah, I know. It's like, wow,
geez, yeah,
okay.
it's like I could talk to you for hours. I mean, we used to literally talk for hours
Yeah.
in class, so it's no surprise there. I mean, you're just a wealth of knowledge within so many different topics. Even if you say you're not an expert in this area, this is not your expertise. I mean, you think critically about things. You're well informed and admirable, and I think that's something that every one of your students knows, right?
I don't
And
know about everyone. The students.
oh, they know. Oh, they know.
I
And
don't
they
know
know who
about
they are. And they know. Just kidding. I'm just teasing. But I think at the end of the day, you've made an impact on many lives,
Oh,
and I would
thank
say a
you.
positive one. And I think that's because of your desire to make the world a better place. And I think that's something that comes across very clearly in your research and in your teaching, right? And your care and guidance. So, is there anything that you want to plug? Is there any articles that you want to get out there, or any piece of advice for anybody who's looking to get into academia?
Right now, I'm going to refrain from giving anyone who wants to go into academia any kind of advice, because it's just such a weird time.
Sure.
No, I don't want to plug anything, but I just want to say, I'm really very grateful. I'm very grateful that I can teach.
Yeah.
And you speak about how much you learned from me, and I learned so much from my students, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
and it's the engagement with my students that really kind of leads me to think certain things through, and it's the planning of a class, it's reading for the class, it's the excitement to, be there, and and it's also sometimes it's the fear, because it's sometimes it's scary to be in front of the class.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. As much as I think that you don't like being on camera,
I don't.
you definitely command a presence, right? And you're definitely like you take charge, and it's admirable what you do up there. You mold minds, and you're creating this whole, I mean, besides a fan group, this whole group of people who are just going to slowly but surely, make the world a better place through your guidance, right? Long term, hopefully. That's the hope, right? Just one semester at a time.
Yeah,
right.
one student at a time. So
when for my cohort, I always used to joke, and we'll wrap it up, but I used to joke and I'd say, guys, remember, and they didn't like me this, especially Sam. He'd always give me this look. I'd say, Sam, remember, pain is temporary, but GPA is forever. And he's like, don't say that. He just give me this look. So anyways, I'll hit stop record. If you guys are listening, thank you so much for listening. I'll debrief with you really quickly, but thank you so much, guys.